Welcome to Record, Mix and Release, a YouTube series which takes you through the process of recording a song from beginning to end in your home studio and releasing it to the world. And in this episode, we will be doing some gain staging. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well, and welcome to the 10th episode in this series where we record, mix and release a song to the world from a home studio. And in this episode we're going to be learning about gain staging. Now, gain staging is a relatively easy skill to learn, but once you know about it and put it into practice, it can really help in the quality of your mixes. So stick around for all of that. Now, if you want to get notified about other episodes in this series, or indeed other episodes on this channel, all about home recording, DAWs, gear reviews, plugin reviews, that kind of thing, then please do subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you get notified about my other episodes. Now let's do some gain staging. So I want to start off by mentioning that I've already actually made a video about gain staging in Cakewalk by BandLab. In fact, that video could be applicable to other DAWs as well, because there's only a few parts which are specific to Cakewalk. Now, the reason I mention it is it's a little bit different to what I'm going to do today. In that older video, I actually went into some detail about why I was doing specific things. In fact, I went into some detail about why we're doing gain staging at all and why I go for specific values, what the theory is behind all of that. I'm not going to do that so much today. This is more about applying that theory to an actual project, a more hands-on kind of video. So I strongly encourage that you do watch the whole of that other video as well, because I think when you combine the two videos together, it will give you a really good understanding about why we're doing this and how we're doing it. So I'll put a link just up above my head here somewhere to that video, and I'll also put a link in the description for that, and I'll put a thumbnail at the end so that you can find it that way as well. So please do watch both videos. Now, today I've actually started off by doing a little bit of work off camera, not very interesting stuff, but I've started off by kind of leveling everything. So I'll explain what I mean. I'm just going to zoom in. You'll see with each channel I have the gain at the top set to 0 all the way across the board. And that's because I actually want to reset my mix to kind of 0 so I can check the gain for every single channel. The other thing that you need to do for that in order to check that gain with the meters we're going to do is make sure your faders are also set to 0. Now, I must warn that it's often the case that it's not a good idea to start actually hitting play unless you've made sure you turn down your master fader at this point, because it can get very loud. Often things are quite out of control. So just bear that in mind. I won't be playing this song in its entirety at this point because I would blow your ears off. Now, I must say that there's a side benefit to this, which I really love, and I don't think it ever gets mentioned in gain staging videos. Up until this point, you would have probably had a kind of a working mix, a headphone mix that you would have been playing along with as you recorded each instrument. Now, in my opinion, what happens is you get a little bit too comfortable with that mix. You start to think, this is sounding right, this is how I want it to kind of sound. But I'm not sure that we maintain a good level of objectivity. So, for example, I tend to feel with myself that if I've just recorded the guitar, when I then go back and listen to the mix, my attention tends to be on that guitar because it's the instrument I've just spent time to record. Now, it could be that you're biased in a negative or a positive way. So it could be that you're not that happy with that instrument. You don't think it's the most exciting thing in the world, so you kind of bury it in the mix. Or it could be that you're really, really pleased with that performance and you're kind of biased towards it and you raise it up a little bit too high in the mix. So I think we kind of lose objectivity. So this is a kind of a good way of just destroying everything you've done so far and starting off with a fresh set of ears and looking at the this piece of work as a whole and seeing what it needs. That's just my opinion. You may have a different experience to that, but I encourage you to try this out and do it this way. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is look at the effects that I also have in there. Now, and you may have some effects which you've set up at this point, which you're pretty happy with, that you've kind of crafted a little bit and you may want to keep them. In which case, I would say at this point for the gain staging exercise, just switch them off. You can do it in Cakewalk here just by switching off the whole effects chain. Now, I'll pop it back on for the moment. Now, there's only one effect which I'm actually going to keep in this, and that is, it's sort of an effect. Yes, it's the amp sim, which I had on here for the bass guitar. I did that in the last video, and I did kind of set up a sound that I think I'm pretty happy with there. So I'm just going to switch that effect off for the time being so that we're not actually hearing it in the gain staging process. And with all of these others here, these are what I call comfort effects. They're just kind of quick effects. A lot of them are presets, which I just threw on quickly just to help me get through the recording process so that I wasn't listening to things that were completely different to what I expect the final result to be. So I'm actually going to go ahead, now that I've leveled all of the gain and I've leveled all of the faders, and then I've switched off any effects chains that I'll be using. I've just switched them off for the moment. I'm going to go ahead and just quickly delete all of these plugins which I've got here, and I'll speed up the video so you don't want to have to watch the next few seconds of me doing that. So I've set all of the gain controls and all of the faders back to 0 across all channels, and including the buses as well, in case you were wondering. I've also deleted any plugins that I won't be using anymore, and I've switched off any effects plugins which I'll be using later, but I don't want them to be switched on for gain staging at the moment. Now, I'm going to be using these meters quite a lot during the gain staging process to see what level my particular channels are getting up to. Now, I happen to find the meters here in Cakewalk a little bit small for my old eyes, and a little bit tricky to look at for the values that I'm going for. So I'm going to be using a free plugin called FreeG, and I'm actually going to be inserting it into my master channel. So if I zoom back out and pop my ugly mug at the top, you can see my master channel over here. And in the effects part of that channel, I'm actually going to insert this plugin. It's called FreeG, and I mainly use it, as I say, because it's a little bit bigger. I'll just change the display here a little bit so you can see it. There it is. Now, it won't be this big if you guys actually use it. This is by the magic of my screen capture. But as well as being a little bit bigger and easier for me to read, I also find that it's just got a couple of handy features where it reads the RMS and the peak level, and you'll sort of see where that becomes relevant later. So I'm actually going to start off by doing gain staging on the very first channel here. Start at the very beginning. Now, this happens to be the verse part for the vocals. I'm going to solo this channel, and then I'm going to go ahead and play it. And I'm just making sure that I am actually in the verse part of the song. And I'm going to do something that no singer wants to do now. You're going to get to hear my vocals completely untreated, not in the mix, no effects. So think about the sacrifice I'm making for you guys now. So here we go. Let's have a listen and let's see what kind of levels this is getting to. I met an old man by the sea. I met a man of mystery. Okay, that's enough for now. So you can see that it's getting to an average level on the RMS here of about -15, and then it's got a peak level of about -7. So it's actually a little bit hot, to be honest with you. When we say hot, it's just been recorded a little bit too loud. Now, you must make sure as well, I should mention, that when you're doing this with a particular channel, go for the loudest section of the song for that particular part. I should have mentioned that earlier. So this is not maybe the absolute loudest, but kind of fairly typical. It doesn't move that much within the course of the song. So I'm actually going to bring the gain down a little bit on this and see if I can get that RMS to around about -18 or so. That's what I'm aiming for with my RMS. I met an old man by the sea. I met a man of mystery. And that's it, it's fine. Do you notice I didn't spend too much time on that? And that's very, very important. You're not looking for absolute exact figures here. It happens to be on -18.84, which is close to -19, isn't it? Don't worry about it. If it had been -19, I probably would have lived with that. That would be fine. Now, the peak value is nice and healthy. It's at -10. I like to keep my peaks around about -12. And even up to about -6. However, if I did say adjust this so that this was at -6 now, for example, or -12 even, it would change my RMS. So for a part like this, for something which has some transients, which are fairly quick, but then sort of settles down to an average level, I'm looking mostly at the RMS. So I'm going for -18. Why am I going for -18? As I say, I do explain this in depth in my other video, which I encourage you to watch. But -18 dBFS is around about what we call a sweet spot, where a lot of plugin manufacturers have tuned their plugins, especially if they're modeled on old vintage gear, to kind of kick in and have their sweet spot around about -18 dBFS. As I say in the other video, a little bit more explanation on that. Now, there's actually quite a few channels in this particular song where I'm pretty sure I won't be using any vintage plugins. So it's kind of not that applicable. And look, you don't need to stress about this if you don't want to do gain staging with those particular values for those channels. It's fine, it's okay. But I do like to do it because even if I've got a few where I want it to be at that specific value, I still want to be the other channels to have their gain at a sort of a similar level, so that everything kind of starts off on a level playing field. And you'll see as we progress and you're doing your actual mix about why that becomes a bit important, because you really don't want faders which are kind of right at the top for some parts and then all the way down the bottom for other parts. There's reasons why you don't want them down the bottom, to do with resolution, etc. I'm not going to go into those now. I'll explain that a little bit later. So you'll see plenty of chit chat on the internet about why you don't need to do this. That's fine. But I do this, and I have found personally that by going through this process, I feel that my mixes have improved in the last few years since I've been doing this. So anyway, -18 is where we're going, and that's it for that one channel. Now, I'll talk about effects a little bit later, because obviously we don't have effects I've only got one channel which has an effect on it, and I'll discuss how we manage effects a little bit later. But for now, I'll say that's done. I'll move on to the next channel, which will be the chorus vocals, and I've still got my same plugin in the master channel still going. I probably just will double click on these values to reset them, and I'm going to go to a chorus section now. Let's move there, and I'll play that. I don't buy what I've been sold. Happiness is made of gold, or another one can fill your soul. And that's peaking at -5.99, and it's got an RMS of around about -16. In a lot of cases, I may well not touch this, but if I want to be particularly particular, then I'll just do a very, very slight gain reduction on this. Hardly anything really at all. I'll play the same section again. I don't buy what I've been sold. Happiness. There you go. So that was one of those kind of moves. I did do it there, but look, do you really need to? No, you could really go, no, that looks fine. So you only want this to be in the ballpark. We're really looking for the channels which stand out. And in fact, some people do this. They kind of play the mix as a whole, probably with the master fader turned down, and just look at the meters and see if anything is just really standing out, and they only do gain staging on those channels. So if you want to do it like that, that's fine. I prefer to be a little bit more meticulous. It's the OCD in me, and I tend to just double check through every single channel. So my next channel would be the chorus outro. So I actually need to move to a different section of the song here, and I'll move to there, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'll just solo that part. I'm going to play it. Slow down, you'll know. I'm just going to reset this again and have a look. Slow down, you'll know. Okay, so I'll probably just pop that up just a little bit. It may be just a little bit quiet, so I'm just going to just add, perhaps, I don't know, up to 1 dB on the gain there. I'm just going to reset the meters, play again. Slow down. Yeah, that's kind of closer to where I want it. Now, all of these particular channels, especially these vocals, it's quite likely that I'll be using some analog modeled plugins, if you like. So, and particularly if they're by Waves, a lot of the time they are modeled to hit the sweet spot around about -18. So I am being a little bit more particular about these ones. So I'm now going to go ahead and not bore you with the rest of this process, if you like, and go through especially all of these vocals. I'll speed up the video, but then I'll be getting to a little bit later on, I'll be getting to some instruments where I do it a little bit differently. So I'll see you after the video sped through those parts. Okay, so we now got to an interesting stage because I've done a lot of vocals, I've done the guitars, all of those kind of instruments, but I'm now onto my first percussive instrument, and that is the actual microphone, which is on the back of the cajon. So I've got that, and I've got all of my drums coming up in my mix next. And I treat these just a little bit differently. I don't so much focus here on the RMS or the average level, but I focus a lot more on the peak level because a lot of these sounds are just made up like of a big transient right at the beginning, and it very, very, very quickly decays, so you don't get to really see an average level quite so much. So just to give you an example, I will play this cajon, and this is the back of the cajon, of course, that microphone. And you can see it's peaking at around about -6 there. So look, that would be kind of okay, no real problem, but that's a little bit hotter than I normally like to set it. So just for consistency in my own mixes, I like to go for more like -12 or so. So I'll just bring my gain down a little bit, see where I am. Okay, it's -10. That's absolutely fine. Again, I'm trying to demonstrate here, don't be too pernickety about it or too exact. It's not an exact science, just in the ballpark. So I will do that with all of those other percussive instruments, the other cajon microphone I've got here, all of my drums. I'm going to do it with the claps and with my little bits of percussion. Then I will be back to sort of piano and organ, and I'll go back to my other method for those using the RMS more as the focus. So I'll go ahead and do that and speed up the video, of course. Okay, so I've done my basic gain staging on all of my main channels, and now I'm going to go ahead and just go through the same process with the buses. Now the buses that I've got at the moment, I'll just drag them all the way across this side of the screen so you can see them. Well, the ones that I made in the previous video where I kind of grouped a number of things together into one bus. So for the most obvious example being all the separate choir channels all come into one stereo channel, which is the choir, which you can see just here. And I've got a number of channels like that, which will be very, very useful when I come to my static mix a bit later. So I've got a bus for the main vocals, I've got harmonies, like I say, I've got the choir, I've got some for guitars, bass, most importantly, the cajon, the drums, the percussion. So those things have all been summed into one little submix, and then I'm just going to go ahead and go through the same process by soloing each of those, playing it, looking at it through the metering, and then adjusting the gain on that bus. So I'll start off with the main vocal here. Let's have a listen. I don't buy what I've been sold and happy now. In fact, I'll just skip forward to a bit where there's a few more voices in there. Let's have a listen. I don't buy what I've been sold, and happiness is made of gold. Okay, it's just a little bit hot once we've got all of the different vocals coming through there. So I'm just nudging that down a little bit on the gain. We'll just have another look. I don't buy what I've been. Probably still a little tiny bit hot, just down a bit more, and I think that's going to be it. Just have a look. I don't buy what I've been sold. Yep, that's more or less fine, and I would do the same for all of these buses. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and then I'll see you at the other end of that. So now I want to tell you about what I think is one of the most important things to understand about gain staging. We've just gone through at this point and we've set the gain for all of our channels and our buses to a kind of an appropriate level, which I've a little bit explained here and explained in the other video. And we've done it at a very specific point. We've done it just before we're going into the static mix. But in actual fact, managing gain happens throughout the whole process of recording and mixing. From right at the beginning where you're actually recording record the actual signal and you set the recording level. Now, so there was a lot of channels on here where I didn't really have to adjust the gain very much, a lot of the vocal channels, because I'd actually been pretty careful at setting a good recording level at that point. And if you're very disciplined in your recording process, you'll actually find that this particular phase, stopping to do this gain staging, is very, very quick because you don't have to do an awful lot. There's some things which are out of our control in that context, such as virtual drums, for example, here, or the other virtual instruments. I obviously didn't have control over the recording level, so I'm just double checking here that they're at a healthy level before I start mixing. But there's also a very, very key point where gain gets affected, and that's when we start to add in effects. Now, it may be that you've already started to add effects before this particular stage in the process, and there's nothing particularly wrong with doing that, but you just need to make sure. And if you remember earlier, I actually switched all my effects off. I would switch them back on now, like I will do with this amp sim on my bass guitar. And I would then go through every single effect and make sure that the gain going in was the same as the gain going out. I should say the gain going out is the same as the gain going in. So make sure that as it goes through each effect, it isn't just ramping up the gain all the time till it gets to sort of an uncontrollable level. So I generally just try and make sure that the gain coming out is the same as the gain going in. So if it comes into the effect roughly, say, minus 18 RMS, I try and make sure the output is the same before it goes into the next effect. So I can't really demonstrate that very, very specifically here because I haven't actually added a whole bunch of effects, but we will be kind of covering it a little bit in later videos, and that is still a part of the process of gain staging. So importantly, I just want you to understand we've kind of stopped to take stock here and just make sure we've got reasonable levels before we go into the static mix. But gain staging is something which actually happens throughout the whole process. It's simply about managing your gain through your recording and mixing process. So I'm going to go ahead now and just double check. I'm going to just make sure that that amp sim is on. Oh, I switched it off and on a few times there, and I'll just open it up. And I'm just going to see what's happening. Obviously, I know that before it was switched on, the level of my bass is around about minus 18 RMS. So I'll just go ahead and use the Cakewalk levels there rather than pop up the other one. Okay, that's fine. And I'm just going to switch the amp sim on and see if there's a big difference in volume. Okay, you can see it's added quite a lot of volume there. So I'm just going to use the master volume on this particular plugin. I'll play again. And I'll just kind of bypass it for a moment. I've probably gone a little bit too far, so I'll just add a little bit more back in. And normally, of course, I can't fit it on the screen at the moment for you guys, but normally I would have that bigger meter up, the 3G one, just to do that a bit more accurately. So you can see there that it's very important to do that because some plugins will make a drastic difference to the actual level of gain. And if that was going into another effect afterwards, that would be hitting that effect very, very hard indeed. So it's important to manage those levels with every single plugin. So that's the basis of what I do with gain staging at this stage. Now, there are some people that debate that you don't need to do this at all, that it's not absolutely necessary in a modern DAW, and they have some good points to make about that. I still feel that I definitely like to do it where the manufacturer of a plugin has advised that there's a kind of a sweet spot that I'd want to get things at. But I also kind of feel that my mixers have still benefited from doing this regardless of whether it's technically needed or not, because it means that I do firstly remain conscious of my gain levels throughout the whole process, and it just kind of sets a level playing field for when I actually start my actual final sort of static mix. So you can choose not to do it, and that's fine. I don't think that just because you skip gain staging all is lost and you'll have a terrible mix. That's not true at all. But I'd encourage you to try at least once or twice and see for yourself if you didn't feel that your mixes benefited from spending what's probably going to be sort of, I don't know, 20 minutes or half an hour to do this before you go into your actual mix. Thank you so much for watching this episode in the series. In the next episode, we will be doing our static mix. Now, if you liked this video, then you can show your appreciation by hitting the like button. It really does help me out. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you're notified about other episodes and content from this channel. And I'll see you in the next video.